Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is What If Naruto and Hinata Leave Konoha Together Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. There were clear skies as he looked across the horizon's distance. One would say that it was a perfect day, but why did dread and sorrow scar his brow and call his mind home? Looking down below, the evidence was seen across what was once his home. Pulling his knees closer to his chest, he looked at the crater that was at one time known as Konoha. It has been a whole week since he defeated Pain, and the village was slowly rebuilding itself. Tents dotted the outside of the crater that was now being filled in preparation for new buildings. Everyone was putting in a tremendous amount of effort to return their home to its former glory. Naruto sat upon the head of his father, what little was remaining of the Hokage memorial, and thought about how much suffering the town had been through because he called this place home. Although the village was now safe for the time being, war loomed in the air, and there would soon be conflict again in the lives of the people he held so dear. This time specifically to gain the power of the Kyuubi that lived within him. There would be no more chances for his friends. If they died in another invasion, nothing could bring them back again. Inside, Naruto's heart broke. He had finally attained everything he ever wanted. The people that had once shunned him are now calling him a hero. Talk of him becoming the next Hokage spread quickly among the tents. His friends no longer thought of him as the knucklehead kid that he had been. He even had the love of a girl who had risked her own life to save him in his most dire moment, nearly dying herself. He couldn't do it again. He wouldn't. Slowly getting to his feet, he picked up his bag and looked over the impromptu city. Well, Kuruma, are you ready? Thinking to himself. In his mind he could feel the Kyuubi stir and grumble. With one last look he turned and started walking, leaving his past behind, not knowing what the future would hold. All he knew is that he couldn't put those precious to him in danger anymore. Deep in thought, Naruto traveled for hours, almost oblivious to the outside world. He thought of what he would do during his battle with Pain and how he would seek a true peace. Just as Pain had sought after power to attain his twisted view of peace, others would too. He would not let anyone stand in front of him when they sought his power just to end up perishing like so many before. His mind thought back to the pervy sage, his father and mother, and even to the old man. Each had sacrificed themselves to stop others who would seek power and died for it. Returning to the real world, he quickened his pace, wanting to put some distance between him and the village before he stopped for the night. It was then that he felt the presence of someone else that was following him. There was no hostility coming from the person, so he assumed it was someone tailing him on Tsunade's orders. He had to lose him so no one would know where he was, attempting to protect him. Not wanting another confrontation, he kept moving. No one could outlast his stamina, and that was his plan. For 2 days he traveled at a brisk pace, often moving through the trees to increase his followers' fatigue. On the second night he made camp, lighting a small fire and eating a cup of instant ramen. He settled down. Never once had he let on that he knew someone was following him. A mere few hundred yards from where he laid on his travel mat was the tail. Figuring Naruto had stopped for the night, they laid down to recoup from the long journey that was expected to get longer. Shortly after midnight, when Naruto had felt that the tracker nin was asleep, he rose from mat and proceeded to where the follower was resting. Pulling a kunai from his pouch, being careful in case the tracker would attack, he approached. His only plan was to tie the person up so he could no longer be followed, thus resulting in a recovery team pursuing him too. The tracker was resting at the base of a tree, obviously sound asleep from the low rhythmic breathing that came from slumber. In the low moonlight that came through the canopy he could see a slender figure, a kunoichi, wearing dark navy blue cargo pants and a cream-colored jacket. Long dark hair with a tint of blue covered half her face, and Naruto stopped dead in his tracks. It was Hinata. His eyes must have been playing tricks on him. He brought up his kunai, poked himself in the hand, just to make sure he was not dreaming. To his surprise, here she was, asleep with her head resting on a small travel pack she had brought with her. She was one of the main reasons he had decided to leave. After her confession poured from her soft lips while he was at his weakest, he had failed to protect her. He slowly approached her and picked her up. To his delight, she did not wake. She must have been exhausted from trying to keep up with him. Much to his surprise, as he was walking back to his small camp, she nuzzled her head into his chest, with the only sound she made was, "Naru-chan." He laid her down on his sleeping mat, pulled a light blanket from his travel pack and proceeded to cover her up to keep her warm. Once she looked to be settled in, Naruto sat against a tree next to Hinata and thought about their childhood together. With all that he learned through his training, he had always been oblivious to Hinata's feelings toward him. He felt like such a loser for not noticing, and had wondered often, after her confession, why she had chosen to fall in love with him. He felt undeserving of such affections due to the fact that he could not protect her while pain had driven one of his chakra rods through her. The shy little Hinata he had trained with, and was assigned to missions with, had grown strong, for it was when he had lost all his strength did she not only come to his defense, but she had the conviction in her heart to confess to him, knowing her own demise. Replaying the memory in his head of what had transpired during the fight, he saw how pain had badly beaten her, and with the last ounce of her strength she tried to pull the chakra rods that held him in place. Even as the rod in pain's hand came down and pierced through Hinata, all he could hear in his mind was her repeating declaration, "I love you." The rays of the morning sun had begun to shine through the trees and splashed across the cream-colored complexion of Hinata's face. Slowly stirring from her slumber, her dreams faded to give way to her surroundings. To her surprise, she could tell she was now lying on the ground and that she was covered by what she hoped was a blanket. Then full realization was coming to her. She had been following Naruto for 2 days straight before she fell asleep in the nook of a tree. She had been so tired and wondered how long Naruto could travel before he had to rest. With shock, she sprang up to a sitting position, allowing the blanket to fall to her lap. Looking quickly around her, she could see that she was in the small camp that Naruto had made for the night. There was a small dig-in where there had been a campfire, a travel pack that was sitting against a rock, and out of the corner of her eye she could see Naruto lying against a tree asleep. He looks so cute and peaceful, and while he sleeps, Hinata thought to herself. She turned toward him and started making her way closer to get a better look at his face. On her hands and knees she slowly inched closer as not to wake him. She could only see the right side of his face at the moment. Hinata jumped back in a fright as Naruto's eyes popped open, looking directly at her, as if he was staring directly into her soul. "Good morning, Hinata-san," Naruto said without the slightest hint that he had been sleeping. In truth, he had not slept all night. He stayed awake watching over the Hyuga princess, making sure no harm came to her. Thoughts of their childhood danced in his head like a lucid dream. He replayed every moment that he could recall that he spent time with her or that she was near him. Looking back, he wondered about how he was so oblivious to the way that she felt toward him. She watched his training matches, went on missions with him, cheering him unconditionally from the sidelines, and even adopted his Nindo in her own way. He had decided last night that she had to go back. He would not lose her to the destruction that constantly pursued him. "Did you sleep well?" he finished. Naruto, I thought you were sleeping," Hinata said in a hushed tone, feeling the heat rush to her head as her blush returned. Naruto could only stare at Hinata for a moment as he thought how cute she was when she blushed. Now, knowing that all the times she had blushed in the past it was because of her affection for him, it only made her more adorable. Pushing that thought from his head, he had to keep focused. "I thought I was traveling alone until a few hours after I left. If I would have known it was you, I would have stopped right there so you would not have to travel so far back to get home," making sure to add some seriousness his voice. Slowly he got up and retrieved his travel pack. Looking back at her, he said, "Goodbye, Hinata." A look of dread spread across Hinata's face at the thought of returning to the village. In a bold move, she reached out and grabbed Naruto by the hand to stop him. He looked down at her. Her other hand was pulled to her face while she looked at the ground. Tears were evident in her eyes as she spoke in a hushed tone, "No. Steadying himself, he wasn't going to lose his ground. You must, Hinata. You cannot come with me. Everywhere I go, I am hunted by those that wish to get a hold of the Kyuubi's power. That is why Konoha was attacked, they were after me. Naruto looked away quickly, not wanting the shy Hyuga to see the horror on his face at the thought of her being killed because of him. With determination in her eyes, she looked up and steadied herself despite the tears in her eyes. I will not, the stutter completely gone. Hearing this, Naruto couldn't do anything but look back down at her. The few tears that rolled down her cheeks tugged at his heart. He had left without saying anything to her because he felt that he could not stand to watch himself break her heart when she knew what he was going to do. I will be hunted. Not just by Toby, but the other hidden villages also. When I chose to leave, I became a missing nin. I cannot go back again. I also cannot allow you to be hurt or worse, when they find me. Looking at him standing there, she could see the confliction in his eyes. They held worry and fear. Then she realized it, he was trying to protect her. She had confessed her long-held emotions to him during the battle, never expecting him to return her feelings. At that moment she could see the care and concern in his eyes for her. Seeing this served to soften her tone. I can't go back. It was a declaration. Much to his surprise, the words that she said rang in his ears. It wasn't that she wouldn't go back, but that she couldn't. What do you mean that you can't? Hinata looked back toward the ground. A blush rose to her cheeks as she recalled what had happened a few days earlier. 4 days earlier, Hinata was returning to the Hyuga compound after her time working at the medical tents that were in the place where the hospital once stood. At her home there were tents spread throughout what remained of the compound. Many of the branch families were busy trying to excavate the ruins of what was once their home. Small buildings were being erected to make life a little more livable until proper houses could be built. She walked into one of the large and majestic-looking tents, the one that she would call home until the main house was finished. Father, I have returned from my assignments. Her father sat behind a large wooden desk going over paperwork, mostly consisting of requests from the other villagers to help in the rebuild efforts and some from the council for assistance on patrols. Looking up from his work, he kept a regal look while he addressed his oldest daughter. Welcome back. Hinata, there is something we must discuss. Follow me. Hiyashi got up from his desk and proceeded outside of the tent. While Hinata followed, he began to talk. Hinata, in light of recent events, there are decisions that we have to make that we may not favor or others will understand at the time. You are my oldest daughter and the heir of the Hyuga clan. You will lead this clan into a glorious and prestigious future, of that I am sure. It is for that reason and the recent losses to the clan that I have made decisions to ensure that our traditions continue. They continued walking for a few moments past rubble piles that looked like they had once been walls that protected their home. Yes, Hinata said lowly, as she was trying to predict what her father would say next. For the life of her, she was getting confused by what he was saying. It is with great happiness that I inform you that I have found you a fiancé. I had to rush things a little, but I have been able to speed up the date to 1 month's time. Hiyashi said flatly. At that moment, as the words of her father rang in her head, and then proceeded to shatter her heart, she felt sick unlike anything she had ever felt before. She stood motionless as she felt her world crumbling down around her. Then in the pits of her stomach a fire started. Fear-fueled rage came frothing forward to her mind. All she could think of right then and there was the audacity of her father picking a husband for her. After everything she has done and been through, he dare deny her the one thing her heart desired the most, her Naruto-kun. Her head hung low, and in the softest of tones came the only response that would be able to move past her soft lips, no. Hiyashi stopped at the soft whisper of a response that came from his daughter. Turning around, he noted that she had stopped moments ago and was not as close as she was when they were walking, now nearly 15 feet away. With all the grace of a prince, Hiyashi walked toward his daughter asking, "What did you say, Hinata?" Hinata's Nindo drove her forward with a more resolute declaration for her father. Looking up in defiance at her father, she had been through enough, but this was one thing she was not backing down, no. Hiyashi stopped at the look in his daughter's eyes. This is going to get messy, he thought to himself. Hinata, he said in his sternest voice. Be reasonable. You are the next head of the clan. A marriage would help unite the clan after what has happened to the village. The young man from the lower branch. No, I will not marry anyone that I do not love. Nothing you can say will change my mind, Hinata shouted. All the regality that was normally found in the Hyuga princess was gone. This was her stand, no backing down, she would be heard and her decision would be respected. Taken aback by his daughter, Hiyashi looked to quickly defuse the situation. Okay, Hinata, then would you introduce me to this young man that you love? The taste of the L word in his mouth when it concerned his daughter left a bad taste. Which family branch is he from? Do I already know him by name? A small smirk showed in Hinata's smile and it was sure to disturb her father. You may meet him if you wish, and yes, you already know him. I am sure everyone in the village knows who he is by now. The look of befuddlement crossed her dad's face. It is Naruto Uzumaki. The look of horror was definitive on Hiyashi's face. You could never. It is against the traditions of the clan. You must marry from within the clan. Our bloodline is sacred and must remain pure. I care not if he saved the people from the village. He could save it 100 times over and I still would not allow it, obviously with a hint of venom in his voice. Trying to return to a more civilized tone, Hinata spoke again. Traditions be damned, this is one thing I will never yield to. I will be with him if he will have me as his wife. Throwing caution completely out the window, she punctuated the point to be sure it would drive home in her father's mind. I love Naruto-ku. Faster than anyone would have been capable of seeing, Hiyashi went to slap the face of his daughter. Much to his surprise, she had easily blocked it with her left arm. Not only that, she had countered with her hand. Glowing blue from her chakra-based attack now sat just under her father's chin. As if in suspended animation, her father spoke the last of what she was to hear from him. If you disobey me in this, you will be stripped of your status and marked with the caged bird seal. With no hatred in her voice, she lowered her stand and brought her arms back to her side. She turned to walk away, looking back at her father she knew would be for the last time. I love you, father. You could try if you like, but the outcome would not be in your favor. At that moment she walked away and she left her family behind. She knew all too well that she would not be welcome back there. She would be free to make her own decision. Present. Naruto hadn't talked to Hinata about her confession on the battlefield. His emotions were too raw after defeating pain and he was becoming tired. He would fight for the ones precious to him, but if he went away then disaster would no longer threaten them. The exhaustion of the continuous battles had worn on him and he just wanted to live without fighting. The lavender-eyed Hyuga sat in front of him, her head hung low to hide the deep red blush that covered her face. She had made her declaration again and this time there was no battle for him to concentrate on, they were alone. An amalgam of emotions swam through Naruto during the story that Hinata was retelling. A fire burned in his chest at the thought of someone else being with Hinata, an emotion he almost didn't expect to be as strong. Fluttering in the pit of his stomach when she had told her father about her emotions for him, emotions that he himself was starting to develop for her. Pride swelled him a great extent as she had stood up to her father. Humility kept him grounded as the realization of what she had given up for him. He could not send her back to the ridicule that she would constantly be the target of from her family. Hinata was not sure that she was awake at Naruto's actions once she had finished her story. He had reached down and taken her hand. Faster than she thought possible, he pulled her into an embrace. He did not yell or think ill of her for her decision. It was an embrace that she could have only had in her dreams. A feint was close at hand, fighting the too often urge, she demanded to remain standing being in his arms. She returned it with a gentle squeeze of her own as she wrapped her arms around him. Much to her dismay, Naruto pulled away, but another thought had come to her mind, I can't wait till I can do that again. Thank you, Hinata. He pulled his arms from around her and had enjoyed the hug more than he thought he would. When he pulled away, he held something in his hand and slowly turned away from his new travel companion. He bit down on his thumb and slammed his open palm on the ground. With a puff of smoke, a large toad appeared. Hey Gamakichi, I have a favor to ask. Looking around, Gamakichi could see no battle and looked at Naruto with a quizzical stare. What do you need? He said, almost afraid to ask. Naruto looked back at Hinata, who now had a dumbfounded look on her face. She really is cute, he thought. He reached up to the back of his head and untied his forehead protector. Hinata noticed then that he already had another one in his hand. Quickly she reached up to her neck just to find out that hers was the one that Naruto had in his hand first. He looked at her with a cheeky grin, and all she could do was smile at the elation she felt as she understood what his plans were. Hinata quickly started to pick up the rest of the camp as Naruto finished his giving his orders to the toad. After the toad had left to accomplish his mission, Hinata and Naruto picked up their packs and walked next together through the forest. Tsunade sat behind her desk that was now located in a small building, the first to be erected, paperwork piled high on both sides and still more stacks littered the floor. A heavy burden weighed on her brow as she oversaw the reconstruction of the village. Work permits dominated the stacks, while other requests were still coming in from neighboring villages for assistance and job orders. The requests for assistance from others were always promptly denied as Konoha was under a restoration act. The village hidden in the leaf would have to come first before they could even lend a hand to anyone else. What was on the Hokage's mind the most at the moment was the sudden disappearance of the village hero. It had been 4 days since he was last seen, and she has done her best to control the local rumor mills. She often attributed his lack of presence to a priority mission when others inquired about him. What is that fool thinking? She thought to herself. A knock came from the door across the desk. Enter, was all she said with a tone that anyone seeking to speak to her would know they were more bothersome than what she wanted to deal with right now. Lady Tsunade, there is a toad here that wishes to speak to you, the messenger said in a quizzical voice. The presence of a talking toad obviously disturbed him. Tsunade jumped from her chair, knocking it over. Bring him here immediately. She bellowed with a slight smile. She only knew of one person now who can summon toads, and this would give her an idea of what her favorite knucklehead was doing. Impatiently she waited for the toad to enter. She straightened her chair and dreadfully sat down on it again as she knew the flatness of it was having a negative effect on her rear end. At last the door opened once more and in came a large toad, a red-orange color with purple spots, doing its best impression to walk like a human. Gamakichi, what news do you have of Naruto? Is he okay? Where is he? The question came in a tirade faster than most would be able to understand them. As Gamakichi approached the desk, he opened his large mouth, his tongue rolled out. Wrapped in his tongue and now laying on top of the desk were 2 forehead protectors, each marked with the hidden leaf symbol. As she looked at them, she felt tears forming in her eyes, her hand now covering her mouth as if to prevent flies from entering it. Lady Hokage, Gamakichi spoke in a somber tone, I have a message and it is the only thing I can speak of. I can answer no other question. The message is, I'm sorry. Sworn to secrecy by Naruto, who had summoned him, Gamakichi was only to say that one thing. Quickly, for the safety of his own life, Gamakichi disappeared in a puff of smoke, who knew what the Lady Tsunade would have done to him with her incredible strength. With the disappearance of the toad, Tsunade popped back into reality. The words I'm sorry rolled through her mind. Then she noticed it. Gamakichi was sent by Naruto, but why were there 2 headbands? The Hokage's eyes widened with a realization of what had happened. Quickly she grabbed 2 sheets of paper and began to write hastily. The entire time muttering aloud, that selfish, inconsiderate prick, who the hell does he think he is? If he thinks he is going to stick me with all this paperwork until the end of my days, he has another thing coming. If he survives the beating I give him for pulling such a stunt when he gets back, I'm going to make him Hokage as an added punishment. Finishing her list, she looks down at them to make sure she didn't leave anyone out, only to notice the tears that were now staining the paper. She had been oblivious to the fact that she was crying the entire time. Making sure her face was dry and her emotions couldn't be seen openly, she yelled, "Get in here." An Anbu officer flashed into the room and respectfully made a small bow to the Hokage. "Take these two lists. The people from the first one are to come to the meeting room in 1 hour. Those on the second list are to arrive 1 hour after that. This is top priority. There will be no one on those lists absent from those meetings. Whatever they are doing will be halted immediately. This is an class secret. No one on those lists is to know who is being called upon until they are in the meeting. And no one outside of this room is to know the existence of those lists or that these people are to be gathered. Once everyone has been notified of their orders, you are to destroy any evidence of what I have told you. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, Lady Hokage." That is all that was heard before the Anbu officer vanished from sight. Tsunade turned around and went back to her desk. Sitting in her chair, she reached for her bottom drawer to pull out a small bottle of sake and took a drink. Thinking she would need a lot more before this day was through, her mind wandered over events that had happened earlier in the week. 5 days earlier. Why do you look so down, Naruto? You should be happy and proud. You saved everyone in the village, and now they see the hero in you that you always wanted, Tsunade said with a smile on her face, trying to cheer up the depressed-looking young man in front of her. Naruto looked out the window of the makeshift office and looked at the destruction that was now Konoha. That was after Pain had destroyed our home, killed everyone in it, and then only as a mercy to me brought everyone back. The somber tone in his voice was more than apparent. Thinking to himself that if he had never been there, then Pain would have never attacked and killed everyone. He then said, "It seems that no matter how strong I do become, people will stop at nothing to get at the power of the QB that resides within me. How many more people must suffer until they do get a hold of me? When it happens again, there will be no one there to bring everyone back, which was a one-time deal. They call me a hero now. When the next attack comes, whether I win or not, will they call me such as we bury their friends and family?" Hearing the depression in his voice, Tsunade made even more attempts to cheer him up. "Come on, Naruto. Celebrate with me. Have a drink," she said, waving around a small bottle of sake she always had in her desk drawer. She knew full well he wouldn't take the offer, but it was an attempt at trying to lighten his mood. Slowly Naruto turned around and started walking toward the door. "No thank you, Ba-chan. I just need some time alone." With that, he left Tsunade leaning against her desk, being propped up by more of the paperwork than the desk itself. Sighing, she hoped that the young man would come out of his slump and accept the people's praises of him as they all looked to him for hope and a brighter future. Noticing the bottle still in her hands, she brought it to her lips, thinking to herself, "Well, I will have to celebrate for the both of us then." It was about 15 minutes and an empty bottle of sake later that she heard a large bang on the door and it swing open violently. Looking up from the stack of papers she was now sorting through, she saw the Hyuga patriarch burst into her office as if someone just stole his oh so precious, though skewed, honor. "Sorry for the entrance, Lady Hokage, but there is a matter that I need your utmost attention for," he bellowed in his most polite voice possible given the amount of anger that he was in. An Anbu operative came in behind the man as the commotion that Hiashi created. With a wave of her hand, Tsunade dismissed the operative and proceeded, "Go ahead and explain what is so important that would warrant you bursting in here like that." With a slight bow as a show of respect, and hopefully some favor in getting assistance, Hiashi continued. After his telling of events that transpired the previous day with his daughter Hinata, he followed with, "That was yesterday, Lady Tsunade. She has yet to return home and I fear for her safety. I have sent members of the clan to look for her over the last 24 hours and we have turned up nothing. I have also contacted all the friends I know she has associations with, and much to my regret they have not seen her either. I ask for your assistance in helping to locate my daughter." Tsunade was sure that she just received a very lopsided story from the man in front of her. This has obviously been a heated family dispute and his daughter had taken off to cool down and maybe put a little fear in her father at the thought of losing her. Even though she was sure things would work out in the end, Konoha and the surrounding area was still dangerous while the village is being reconstructed. Okay, Hiyashi, I will put together some people to look for her. If you should hear from her or she returns, you are to notify me immediately so I may recall that team. We are trying to rebuild our home after all. Do we have an agreement? With a little less hostility in his demeanor, he responded, Thank you. I will let you know immediately if we have any information. Thank you, Hokage-sama. And with that, he bowed and took his leave, making sure this time he closed the door quietly. Present day. Little did she know then what she was about to reveal now. Waiting in the meeting room, nearly everyone had already shown for the first presentation. Just as Tsunade was about to lose her patience waiting for the last person to show, Kakashi strolled through the door with his favorite book in hand. Tsunade cast him an evil stare that forced him to put the book away. With that, she closed the door. Raising her right hand, her fingertips lit like they were on fire with a violet glow. She slammed her hand on the wall and a bright burst of violet color began to envelop the room. Kakashi, sitting at the meeting table, raised his one visible eyebrow and knew that something serious must have happened for Tsunade to have sealed the whole room from any prying eyes or ears. The rest of the people present were notably too young to be given such secret information before this time. Tsunade turned around with a scowl on her face and proceeded to the meeting table. Some of the people chose to stand or lean against the wall, and a few others had chosen to take a seat. Reaching into her robe, she produced the 2 forehead protectors that were delivered that morning. Throwing them on the table, she spoke, These belong to 2 of your comrades. Everyone looked around, guessing where this was going. Sakura gasped first as she realized who was missing that would have normally been present within a group like this. She raised her hands to her mouth and tears welled in her eyes as she suspected the worst. Everyone else grasped what she had learned just moments before. A small murmur started to erupt. Slamming her palm back to the table to get everyone's attention, she continued, This is an S-class secret. No one outside of this room shall speak of what you few will know. For those of you who have not been privy to such secret information, the penalty for releasing said information will be death. Tsunade looked on with a cold stare just to make sure everyone was on the same page. All of those that attended gulped at what they were about to hear. More than half of them were trying to decide if they wanted to claw their way out of the room so they couldn't hear. All in all, they stayed their ground. This was their friends after all. After a few worried looks that Tsunade saw across the room, she decided to continue. It didn't look like anyone would opt to leave. By now you know that those 2 forehead protectors belong to Naruto and Hinata. She stood up straight so she could steady her own nerve. No, they are not dead. I have a strong belief that they are alive and well at the moment. They were not captured or tortured but left of their own free will. Murmurs started around the room again. This is why I have called you all here. This is a search mission, S-class. You will spend the next 2 weeks searching for your missing friends. You will be separated into groups with at least one tracker with you at all times. Neji, Kiba, and Shino will all be the trackers. Teams will be 3 members each, while Kakashi will be in charge of all relayed information. No one in this room is capable of taking Naruto head-on, as we all know, so aggression is out of the question. Remember, these were your friends, they know your styles and your capabilities better than anyone else. You will have to think outside of the box at any hope of tracking Naruto. There was a few minutes pause while Tsunade gathered herself for her next proclamation, one she dreaded to say or dare to imagine. If the 2 weeks are up and we have not made contact with the targets, a declaration will be made that both Hinata and Naruto perished during a mission. Gasps came from the small group and some anger at the idea that they would give up on trying to find them. To bring order back, Tsunade slammed her hand back on the table with enough force to cause splinters to start shooting from one of the legs. Silence, she yelled. From this day forward, each of you will have an additional objective in that case. On any mission that you are assigned to, you will continue to gain information on their whereabouts, and that information will be passed to me directly by word of mouth. Neji, I have a great understanding of why Naruto has left. Hinata, on the other hand, is another matter. Although, I can only imagine what has happened within the Hyuga clan, there is definitely a correlation. Since you are a part of this mission and a member of the clan, it is of utmost importance that this does not get leaked to anyone from your clan. You are also charged with handling rumor control for the clan. Any rumors being spread that involve Naruto and Hinata leaving together, or are involved in this together in any way, are to be dealt with. This goes the same for all of you if you happen to hear any gossip in the street. Squash it. This is a misinformation campaign. Looking around with a deadly serious scowl on her face, she stated lastly, there will be no question and answer session for this mission at this point. Kakashi will assign the remainder of the teams. Now if you will all excuse me, my next pain will be in here shortly, dismissed. With that she turned to the door and removed the seal, allowing everyone to leave. Knowing she had another appointment in a few minutes, she stayed and sat in one of the chairs, rubbing her temples as if that would make the world a better place for her right now. Noticing the forehead protectors were still on the table, she proceeded to pick them up and hide them just as she had before. She didn't want the next group to come in with more questions than she was willing to answer. This matter would have to be handled with extreme delicacy. Just as she readied herself, there was a knock on the door. Enter, she mumbled. In strode Hiashi and a few elderly gentlemen that were evidently from the Hyuga clan, most notably from their pale eyes. As the members of the Hyuga clan sat in the chairs around the table, Tsunade went through her plans in her head to keep this meeting as brief and uninformative as possible. When everyone was seated, she started, Hiashi, you came to my office in a colorful way a few days ago asking for my assistance in finding your missing daughter. Not a sound out of anyone. Good, this should be quick, Tsunade thought to herself. I do have information on your daughter, but in exchange I have a request that must be met without exception. Now it started, murmurs between the Hyuga council. Oh, how she hated those old prehistoric fools. Looking to Hiashi, who had not whispered a single word, nodded for her to continue. His answer would determine which version of the story she would give them. When you asked for help, you said it was over a family and clan dispute you had a disagreement on. This resulting in her running away from your compound, am I right? Still in his stoic manner, Hiashi nodded again. Then the request is this, I want to know exactly the reason for her disappearance. What this so-called dispute was about. She is one of my best kunoichi and I want the truth in its entirety. No vague answers this time. Hiashi hid his surprise well from the Hyuga council. He knew what game Tsunade was playing. To get the whole story about his daughter, he would have to suffer a little humility in front of the clan for not handling his own family matters. Despite how stern he appears to be, he cares for his daughter with more affection than he is allowed to show in front of others. This is largely due to his position as the head of the clan. To see his daughter home safe and sound, he would do this. With all the regularity he could muster, he retold the tale of the last time he had seen Hinata. Tsunade's anger was evident on her face while she listened to the recalled memories of Hiashi. To her surprise, she was not sure which made her more ill-tempered. The way that Hiashi had tried to exploit his daughter without considering her feelings, or the fact that the rest of the council had leaned in closer to Hiashi to grab every morsel of gossip they could deem useful of discrediting him. After the head Hyuga had stopped talking, Tsunade sat for a moment pondering over all of the information. It was then that a smirk rose at the corner of her lips, something that Hiashi must have noticed. He started to look a little more uncomfortable as he saw something in the woman that could be described as maniacal pleasure coming from her eyes. This group of ancient pompous windbags who looked down on a lot of society was going to get it, and she was happy to do it. Tsunade then stood to make sure she got the point across. What you have heard in this room from the time you entered to the time you walk out this building is considered an class secret and will not leave this room. You will not discuss it with anyone else. This includes members in your homes, wives, sons, daughters, and member of your family branches including the clan head. It will not pass your lips even upon your death, and in the event that I discover someone has revealed it, death will be the punishment. With that she looked to Hiashi, who gave her a nod with all the meaning of a thank you for not allowing this matter to escalate the tension within the clan. With that being said, no one will act on the information that I am about to share. The penalty for this will be the same. With that statement, there was almost a unified groan in the room, as if an 8-year-old just realized they had lost their favorite toy. Tsunade turned around and started walking for the door. Lady Hoka. Hiyashi was cut off by the sound of metal clanking on the table. Everyone looked up toward her with bewilderment as to why she would throw 2 forehead protectors onto the table. Before she reached the door, she looked back at those staring at her. Hinata is with Naruto. They have been gone for the past 3 to 5 days. I don't think they intend to come back. With that, she walked out the door to be accompanied by Shizune, who had a wicked grin on her face that was only matched by the one on Tsunade's. What kind of backwards ancient land do they think this is? Attempting to force a young woman to marry against her will, she thought to herself. She had the last laugh in the end. The one thing the members of the Hyuga Council hated the most, it was to have information that could possibly get them more power and influence but never have the capability to use it. It had only been a week since they had left the rubble that was once their home, and only 5 days since they decided to travel together. Just as Naruto had expected, Tsunade sent search teams to look for them. He wasn't sure whether they were sent just to search and identify, or to capture. He was sure capture wasn't possible if it was him they were after. He was surprised to learn that the ones in pursuit were his friends. It was a smart move considering his friends would have a good idea how he would react and how he would avoid detection. This was going to be a challenge, and there was nothing more than a challenge. Earlier, while the two were standing on a large hill that overlooked the forest, Hinata used her Byakugan to see if anyone was trailing them. Sure enough, there were 3 teams of 3 moving in their direction at a considerable pace. Immediately Naruto created dozens of shadow clones, and with a smirk on his face sent them off in the direction of the pursuers. Seeing the look on Naruto's face, Hinata could not help but ask, Naruto, what are they going to do? For the few days that they had been together, her stutter had almost vanished, with the exception of when Naruto would embarrass her. They sat quietly at night getting ready to sleep. As if on cue from the forest below, guttural growls and howls erupted from what looked like a majestic scene. This was quickly followed by the screams from the people that were after them. Naruto looked down at Hinata, who had an appalled look on her face of what was happening to those people. Have you ever been to a haunted house? He looked at her with a wide grin. The thought had just entered her mind that the famous prankster of her childhood struck again. His clones had changed into a wide variety of monsters and ghouls to slow down the trackers. At that moment, Naruto's face went blank as he felt the knowledge of some recently dispatched clones flooding his mind. He grabbed Hinata by the hand and turned to put distance between them and their pursuers. Hinata was blushing at the sudden contact as Naruto led her away. There was a sense of urgency in him now, and he soon explained who was coming after them. She was left in shock, now knowing who they had sent. They had been careful to always remain in heavily wooded areas, travel through streams to cover their tracks and make it harder to detect their course or previous location. They had even been without a campfire for the last few nights, in case someone was to stumble upon it and could easily come after them. They soon came to an open field and Naruto came to a sudden stop, Hinata almost running right into him. Hinata jumped back as Naruto whipped around to her with an outstretched hand. Hinata, give me your clothes, in a demanding voice. It was at that point she almost lost it. Blood rushed to her head and a slight dizziness started to take hold. She had often wondered what it would have been like to be with Naruto romantically, but here in an open field, while their friends were right on their tail. Seeing the shock on Hinata's face, he quickly explained. I need a piece of your clothing from your pack. Something you have recently worn with your smell still fresh on it. Quickly she caught on. Reaching in her bag, she pulled out a blouse she had just worn yesterday. They had been on the run, never stepping foot onto a path or road. Their initial destination hadn't even been a village or town, so they were not able to wash their clothes as of yet. Naruto did the same, getting a pair of pants that he had worn when he first started the trek. He cut both garments into strips, standing straight and making the cross sign with his fingers. He summoned more clones. When the smoke had cleared, there stood 12 copies of Naruto. Much to Hinata's surprise, standing next to the Naruto clones were 12 copies of herself. She had never been very good at creating clones of herself and wondered if this is what she really looked like. To her amazement, they were beautiful. She blushed at the thought of Naruto creating clones of her looking so much more appealing than she was. At an instant, her blush turned inward, thinking that she didn't compare to the image that Naruto had of her. Naruto passed out the strips to the clones, knowing that the clones didn't have a particular smell. When he was done with that, the clones took off in all directions to help confuse the trackers. After they had left, Naruto summoned another batch of clones. Hinata had gasped as she saw 6 Narutos and 6 Hinatas, not as they looked now, but as though they were from varying stages of their lives. A tear came to her eyes as she saw a small version of herself from the day she had first met Naruto, still in her small little kimono. Seeing the small Hinata, she wanted to pick her up to hold her. She looked at Naruto in bewilderment and he quickly glanced at her with a grin that reminded her of how mischievous he could be. We may be grown and mature now, Hinata, but it still doesn't mean we can't have a little fun, especially with our friends. With a nod to the clones, they shot off in groups of 2s back the way they had come. She smiled up at him, wishing she could see the looks on her friends' faces when they encountered the younger versions of themselves. Once again, Naruto grabbed his accomplice's hand, not noticing her blush, and ran off through the clearing and back into the woods. As they ran, Naruto began to explain his plan. The clones with our clothing will slow them down. Once they reach the clearing, they will have to stop and try to track which ones are the real ones. Although Kiba and Akamaru are great at tracking by smell, they will have to hunt down all the clones in different directions. Because no one knows the Taju Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, they will have to go themselves to look. Even the Byakugan will not tell the real from the fakes, so Neji will be useless as a tracker as long as there are clones of us out there. Shino's bugs could do the trick, but as long as we have a great amount of distance between us and them, that should not be a problem either. The distance will be our greatest obstacle. If I was alone, I could outrun them by stamina alone. I'm just worried at how you will hold up after traveling for such a long time. Sorry, Naruto-kun, Hinata said softly. Although she was happy to hear that Naruto was concerned about her. He slapped himself mentally as he heard the hurt in Hinata's voice from her apology. How could he be such a fool as to let her think that she was a burden to him? Don't be, Hinata-chan, we are in this together. With that word, together, Hinata's spirits lifted again. Again he spoke, we need to travel for at least 2 days straight without stopping to maintain a good distance between us and them. If you need to rest, you must let me know. I think I have a plan for that also. Moments earlier, the assembled 11 ninja had finally caught up with him after days of searching. It was Kiba that had sniffed out a small campsite that had the combined scents of Hinata and Naruto. Now they were hot on their trail. Kakashi was darting between the teams, relaying information to the team trackers. They were weary as fatigue was taking a toll on their bodies. They could not rest much as they needed to catch up to the deserters. They had been a few days behind, but now they were within sight. Neji had seen the chakra of 2 people climbing over a small mountain in the distance. It was Kiba's group that had the first encounter. Ghouls and monstrous creatures came at them in full force. Roughly 18 of them, some had to be the Walking Dead, or creatures that would resemble the nightmares that children would have or parents would tell to get the children to behave. This took Ino by surprise as she let out a loud shriek. The group came to a halt just before the monsters reached them. Lee had braced himself, nearly giving in to the urge of charging straight in. Quickly Kiba looked for an opening. The last thing that he wanted to tangle with was dead bodies. Their group was circled in. There was no escaping unless they went straight through. Kakashi heard the screams from the direction where Kiba's group was located. Quickly he raced to the location. Kiba and Akamaru took notice of a large beast which they felt was the most threatening. It was 3 times the size of a bear, with claws that curved under like those of a cat. Upon closer inspection of the razor-sharp claws, they appeared to be dripping a thick liquid as if it has just finished tearing apart a deer and the blood was still soaking the paws. Ino was busy trying to keep what looked like half-eaten people from getting a hold of her. Lee was busy taunting what appeared to be a large disfigured rhino, muttering something about how his youth could triumph over all obstacles. Ready Akamaru, the large white dog Nin, looked at its master with understanding and barked once. In a puff of smoke, the canine turned into an exact copy of Kiba. With a shout, fang passing fang, they launched forward at the beast. With as much power as they braced for impact, knowing that even with such a technique they would suffer some minor damage themselves due to the sheer size of the beast. There was a loud pop as they collided and passed right through the enormous monstrosity. Kiba and Akamaru came to a rest at the base of the tree, quickly trying to process what had happened. Shadow clones, he thought. He quickly shouted to his teammates of the discovery. Without much effort, the three dispatched the remainder of the clone monsters with a fury of kunai. Just as they had finished off the last two, Kakashi appeared poised for battle with an enemy that was obviously not there. Ino filled him in on what had happened and they all concluded that they must be getting close to the runaways if they were seeing shadow clones. Know this, they concluded these were made to be a distraction, only seeking to put some distance from who they were after. Kakashi leapt off to inform the other two teams of what was happening. No doubt they were being slowed down by similar shadow monsters. Shino's group was on its way again. They had dispatched the shadow imagination of their once prankster teammate. Now they were in hot pursuit once again. It was Sakura that had seen them first, but there was something wrong. She came to a sudden stop, taking her teams a moment to realize she stayed back for some unknown reason. Standing out on a limb of a tree, Sakura tried to process what she saw. It looked like two small children ran through the woods together. There was something very familiar about that though. There was undoubtedly a small boy with messy blonde hair, but he was pulling a small girl behind him that had short dark blue hair wearing a kimono. It was like a dream from her past that lingered in her head. She swore she was in a genjutsu. That was until Shino and Tenten landed next to her on the branch. Follow me, Sakura said, coming out of her daze. Jumping to the ground, they ran about 100 yards in the direction Sakura had seen the children go. They reached a small clearing in the woods, and as it opened up they were greeted by the cries of a little girl. Looking in the direction of the cries, they were astounded to find the cries coming from a small Hyuga girl in the middle of the clearing. Tears started to overwhelm Sakura's eyes as she took it all in. It was Hinata when she was around the age of 5. At her feet was the body of Naruto when he was around the same age. His white shirt was torn as he lay unconscious, dirty from a recent beating, with blood coming from his nose and a split lip. It was a scene from their past when Naruto had been referred to as the village demon. All three stood in shock of the flashback to a time of their lives they would prefer to leave forgotten. They were lost in the scene of the two children. Feeling ashamed of their part in Naruto's pained childhood, for standing by while watching others take their revenge on him for what had happened years earlier. It shook Sakura to her core as she knew the man that Naruto had become. She had treated him so poorly during their time growing up, thinking of him as no more than a nuisance. Walking up behind her, Kakashi placed a hand on Sakura's shoulder. It's not real, he said to the three, more to the pink-haired girl than the others. Kakashi took note of the effect that these shadow clones had on everyone that had seen them. Naruto was not gifted in the art of genjutsu, but he had a great affinity for messing with people's minds, and especially those that he knew. He recalled a moment while trying to relay instructions between groups. He passed a pair of clones that looked like the Walking Dead. What troubled him about them was that it looked like two young shinobi from his past. The shadow clones had taken the form of his fellow teammates from when he was young, Rin and Obito. Both were saturated in blood with gaping wounds. It even stopped Kakashi in his tracks. Sakura looked down at the ground, not wanting to see the cruel joke that played out in front of them. Her anger was building inside and was noticed by the clenching of her fists. How she hated to relive those memories, a time when she couldn't see him for who he was. I know. That is why I am going to pummel him when I get my hands on him. With that statement, they ran off, trying to ignore more of the little Hinatas and Narutos as they crossed paths. Finally, the three teams, along with Kakashi, reached the top of a small hill that had a cliff face at their backs. From what Kiba could understand, both Hinata and Naruto had been standing at this very spot. Now something was wrong. The smell of the two runaway shinobi was spread out everywhere. It was coming from many different directions. Akamaru came bounding up out of a wooded entrance in front of them and sat barking at Kiba. Kiba was nodding in understanding. While the tracker nin were trying to discover the direction the two had run off to, the rest of the group was standing back recounting the events of their time in the forest below. Kakashi-sensei, they are trying to lead us into different directions. Kiba spoke out. There are 13 trails throughout the woods, all with their scent, and I can't pinpoint the real ones. Neji spoke next. The woods are thick, so it would be difficult to see them even with my Byakugan. Even if I could, he is more than likely using shadow clones, and I cannot differentiate between those as well. Kakashi then looked to Shino. At this distance my insects won't be able to reach him. If they keep up this pace, I won't be able to get a lock either. Kakashi looked up at the sky. This is going to take a while, he thought to himself. He then proceeded to give the orders for searching out the clones and tracking the real ones. Night had already come and the forest was dark. The thick canopy kept most of the moonlight out, so the figures that bound through the trees looked like shadows running through shadows. They had been making good time, but as Naruto noticed, he had to slow his pace a little to allow Hinata to stay by his side. She must be getting tired, he thought to himself. They came to a stop at the base of a tree and Naruto crouched down. Hinata was at his side trying to understand what he was doing. He looked up at her and with a slight smile said, "Get on." Hinata backed up a step, and at the thought that he was asking her to let him carry her. I'm fine. I can keep going," she proclaimed. Standing back up, he looked at her, deep into her light lavender eyes. "We need to keep moving, and I know you are getting tired. You need some rest. Even if you don't sleep, it will help your body recover, if you can relax a little. It will be just for a short distance and then you can start again." He got back down on one knee with his back to her. Giving in, she wrapped her arms around his neck, something she had always wanted to do before but was too timid to attempt. "Okay. But only for a little while," she said as he wrapped his arms around each leg and hoisted her onto his back. After a quick adjustment so she would be comfortable, he was off running again. Naruto tried his best to be as graceful as possible so he wouldn't make any sharp or sudden movements. She needed some sleep and he was more than happy to carry her so she would be rested by morning to continue on. His increased stamina and chakra reserves are one of the benefits of having the Kyuubi sealed within him, and he was grateful for it now. He thought to himself as he ran across the forest, looking for a plan on how to keep them from being caught. Knowing that the determined pursuers were not going to let up as long as they thought the two were in the area, he would have to come up with something that would totally throw them off their trail. Hinata clung to her lifelong love's back as they bounded through trees and ran across the forest floor. Her sore muscles started to ache as they relaxed while being carried. She was holding her Naruto-kun and he was holding her, in a way, and if they weren't being chased after, she would be the happiest girl in the world. Fully feeling her exhaustion, she laid her head on Naruto's right shoulder and enjoyed the way the air that rushed by blew through her long hair. She took in his musky scent as her head nuzzled closer, her nose pressing into his neck. She soon fell fast asleep. The next day had proven promising as Naruto felt they had put a great deal of distance between the ones who were searching for them and where they currently were. In the back of his mind, though, he knew they were closing in. Hinata had woken while Naruto carried her near noon, much to his dismay. When she came to, she was not sure of where she was or who was carrying her as she hadn't become fully awake. At once, when the night memories came flooding back, her body stiffened at being so close to him. In mid-leap it threw off Naruto's balance and they tumbled down from the trees. As they recovered from the hard landing, all Naruto could say was, "Good morning, Hinata-chan," as he rubbed the back of his head while smiling at her. They continued at a hurried pace for the remainder of the day to settle outside of a small clearing for the night. When Hinata asked Naruto if they were safe yet he responded, "We should be out of reach for at least one night's rest. Besides, I may have a lot of stamina but that does not mean that I do not need rest also." Hinata blushed as she remembered being carried on his back while she slept. All he could think about when he saw her blush like that was how utterly adorable she was. He set up a small camp with 2 mats and blankets, no campfire, so they could get some sleep. As Hinata lay down, Naruto stayed awake and aware, assuring her he would be asleep soon also. When he knew she was asleep, he promptly made a half-dozen shadow clones to watch over her while he went out to survey the area. Morning had come and they had packed camp after eating. Naruto didn't say much, and it looked as if he hadn't slept well either. Hinata was growing a little concerned for his well-being. Naruto had noticed this and he had tried to put on the best face he could to keep her hopes up. They continued along to their unknown destination at a brisk but more leisurely pace. They reached an opening in the woods and stepped out into a clearing. There was a rushing sound around them, and upon further inspection it was coming from a waterfall. There was a river no more than 100 yards from them, and then the clearing stopped there. The river spilled over the side into a valley below that was dotted with rolling hills and patches of forest that could stretch until the end of the horizon. Hinata walked over to the river to look at the waterfall below and was nearly dizzy at the sight that the spray made, more than 300 feet below them. They took in the magnificent sight in front of them for a few moments before attempting to leave. There was a sound coming from the woods, and all at once there were 10 shinobi facing the couple in the open field. It was their friends and companions who stood before them, not in a threatening manner but a force that would intimidate others that did not know them. With their backs against the cliff and the rocky end of the waterfall below, Naruto stepped in front of Hinata to protect her. With Hinata just behind his left shoulder, he looked across at his friends. How he hated doing this. "It is because I care so much for them that this has to be done," he thought. "Naruto, what do you think you are doing?" Sakura spoke first. Summoning his resolve to do what must be done, he stood his ground. "We are leaving because we want to be left alone. I am done with everything. I have risked everything to protect those that I care about, and I have asked for nothing in return." From his right he could see a brown-haired Hyuga with his blood trait activated just as he spoke. "Hinata, come here this instant. What has gotten into you?" Naruto shot him a look that stopped him dead in his tracks as Hinata tensed up behind him. "Your father has been worried about you. You have a duty to your clan." That stirred an already bitter rage in Hinata as she remembered what her father had attempted to do. "Really, Neji-chan? I suppose that is why he tried to have me married off. Against my will and wishes he wanted me to marry someone I had no love for, or had not even known." Tears welled up in her eyes at the thought. Just to help solidify and unify the clan, he was going to sell off his daughter for political reasons. He even went as far as mentioning how many clan members we had lost, as if I was to be breeding stock to boost numbers. Naruto saw it spread across all their faces, a realization that they more than likely did this because they love each other and were bound to be separated if they had stayed. This is what Naruto had hoped for. The memories of Hinata's story strengthened his resolve into hardened steel now at the thought of how despicable the Hyuga clan was. How did such a sweet girl like Hinata come from a family like that? He had to keep his wits about him and continuously watch everyone closely. Shikamaru especially had to be watched if they wanted to be able to escape this. "Naruto, Hinata, let's be reasonable about this." Kakashi spoke next. "Even if you make it out of here and evade use, you will be hunted nin. People will be pursuing you no matter where you go. Come back home and we will talk with Tsunade. Maybe we can think of a way to end this happily to where you two can be together." Kakashi started to move forward. Naruto reacted in lockstep. Bringing up his right hand, he created a wind release, Rasenshuriken. The act put fear into everyone on the spot. Kakashi stopped in mid-step, knowing that if that thing went off there would be casualties. "Now everyone, stop," Naruto demanded. "I know that is a lie, Kakashi-sensei, so don't try to smooth it over." The Hokage has little influence in the internal affairs of the clans. In fact, it is almost no word at all. They will never allow us to be together. I saved the people of the village, defeated the greatest threat we have ever seen, yet I still am not worthy of being with someone whom I care dearly for. He needed to shake their emotions, to get them to second guess themselves so they would hesitate to attack. Lowering his left arm, he wrapped it around Hinata and dipped his mouth close to her ear so as to whisper. She wrapped her arms around his neck and looked up to him with an endearing smile, wondering what he was planning to do. Kakashi pulled up his forehead protector that was covering his left eye, revealing the trademark Sharingan. Naruto, I don't want to have to do this. Please come back with us. Hinata saw Naruto lower his hand and the chakra-infused Rasenshuriken dissipated. She had taken this as a sign that whatever Naruto had planned was going to be happening any moment. Ni-chan, tell father and Hanabi, I love them both so much. Be strong for them, Ni-chan. Naruto brought his other arm down and had wrapped it around Hinata's waist, pulling her tight against him. Blood rushed through Hinata, evidently defying gravity and pooling in her face. She was confused by the exceptionally possessive and endearing words he had said when talking about them. Her mind was almost lost as he spoke. I don't want to have to hurt any of you either. He looked across the group with deep sincerity. Tears filled Sakura's eyes, it almost seemed as if she knew what he was about to do. Ino had tears also, but they took in a more romantic look as if she was watching a play with a happy ending. Most of the guys had a look as if they could never believe they could ever love someone as much as Naruto seemed to love Hinata. I will protect those that are most precious to me, he said in a somber voice. He looked at Shikamaru to make sure he hadn't tried to manipulate the shadows, but also to give him a small smile. It almost seemed as if time stopped at that very moment. Naruto turned his head toward Hinata and brought his mouth to her ear again. In less than a whisper, more like a breath, he spoke so only she could hear, I love you. Her body stiffened in their tight embrace briefly before going limp. Once he knew that she had fainted and her weight was in his arms, he rocked back, taking them both over the cliff head first. The last they heard was Naruto saying, find peace through love. As fast as they could move, they were still too slow. The capture team had now become a recovery team. The ones that could move did so and reached the cliff edge just in time to see blood erupt from the bottom of the falls and start its journey down the river. Shredded clothing and what was more than likely body parts started to move down the river as well. 2 weeks later, in Konoha, it was a mournful day in the village hidden in the leaves. Even the orange and pink sunset failed to cover up the depth of despair that everyone in the village was going through. They had buried what remains they could find at the bottom of the falls along with some of the clothing they had gathered. The village cemetery had been one of the first things that had been reconstructed, mainly for most of the people that had not been able to be brought back to life after the battle with pain. With the news of Naruto and Hinata's death, there was a rush job put on it so it would have all the majestic beauty it had before the village was destroyed. Although normally Hinata would have been buried in the Hyuga family plot on the compound, Tsunade has demanded she be buried next to Naruto. Hiyashi would have rejected the idea at any other time, but for the love of his daughter and the guilt he had for driving her away by denying her the one she loved, he agreed. For all of Naruto's sacrifices, he was granted the honor of being buried next to the Hokage plots as a testament that he had everything in him to become a great Hokage himself. He and his love lay there in their plots for the rest of time. Of course, no one will ever know what truly happened to cause their deaths, as the truth has been locked away as an S-class secret. The official story as it has been spread throughout the world is that both shinobi were on an S-class mission when they were attacked by overwhelming odds. Many villagers romanticized this into fantasies that the two were in fact lovers and that during a mission Hinata had been injured. In the defense of his soon-to-be wife, Naruto gave his own life to protect her. As his dead body laid there, she slumped over his chest and died there on top of him from a broken heart. The services were over and the people in attendance had already left, trying their best to get past the horrible events of the day. There were 2 exceptions though, as evident by the pink-haired girl that was still slumped in front of the side-by-side plots. Sakura sat there on the grass with her head hung staring into her black morning dress, one that she thought matched how she felt inside. She sat there and sobbed even though there were no tears present on her face. Her body could no longer produce them and her eyes burned for it, but the pain in her heart was too great for her to notice. On a not too distant wall sat a spiky white-haired shinobi looking over the crying girl. He would glance back and forth at the graves in a slow disbelief. Not because his pupil had died, or the cover story that was used to hide the truth from the world. His disbelief wasn't even in how much Sakura was showing her feelings for the deceased teammate when she never really showed it before. His disbelief was that not only did he live long enough to see his own sensei become Hokage and then bury him, but now he buried the man's son, Naruto. A soft moan came from the darkness. A single soul stirred with its senses reaching out for any information of the environment. Pale lavender eyes popped open as memories came flooding back. She tried to sit up from where she had been laying only to find that there was a weight laying across her. Her eyes were quickly adjusting to the dim light as she tried to reach down to find out what was on top of her. She found that something had a hold of her hand with a firm grip that she couldn't free herself from. As she lay there waiting for her sight to return as normal as possible, her mind fluttered back to the last things she remembered. They were standing in front of their friends, their backs against a sheer cliff, and a waterfall that crashed into the rocks more than 300 feet below them. She had her arms wrapped around her childhood love as he held her tight against him, much like she thought lovers would. The last thing she could recall was Naruto whispering in her ear in a husky voice, "I love you." She slowly turned her head around, taking everything in. Everything was slow and calculated, not knowing if she had been captured. She was in a cave and there was a dim light coming from a far-off corner. Laying on top of what appeared to be a cot, she looked down to see if she could free herself from the restraints. The moment she saw the blonde tuft of hair, she was not sure if she ever wanted to be free of what kept her down. Her hand was being held in his and it seemed that he wasn't ever going to let it go. A warm feeling stirred in her heart. He had laid a blanket over her and must have fallen asleep, when she had fainted, while sitting in a chair at her bedside. She lifted her free hand and tried to brush the hair out of his face so she could see him better. She couldn't help it. Just as she touched his cheek, he stirred, sitting straight up with such speed he lost his balance and the chair he had been in tipped backwards with him in it. A loud thud came as he hit his head against the cave floor. Hinata brought her hands to her mouth and let out a soft giggle. Quickly he recovered himself and upon hearing her giggle he got onto his hands and knees with his head nearly to the floor, in a most unusual bow. "I'm sorry," he said with a squeak. He was sorry for more than one thing at that moment, but he was waiting for a pounding once she realized what he was talking about. She looked at him puzzled at why he would be doing such a thing for just merely falling asleep with his head resting on her stomach. Then she noticed. The heat in her heart turned into a fire that burned her entire body, her face turned as red as any of the juiciest apples one could imagine. Under the blanket she could feel the fabric of the cot against her skin. Her clothes had been removed save from her lace bra and underwear. Sound could not escape her mouth and air was reluctant from entering it. He had undressed her before putting her on the cot. Smoke could nearly be seen coming from her ears as her mind went into overload. He had seen her nearly body, but why would he do such a thing? Naruto looked up in surprise when no harm came to him. He quickly saw the embarrassment and distress that played across Hinata's face. "Your clothes were soaked and you started shaking really bad," he said, trying to justify what he had done but felt more like a pervert nonetheless. "They are dry now." She quickly came to her senses at the idea that she had been soaked in water. The waterfall came to her mind. Had they fallen to their deaths? She put that thought into the back of her mind as all she wanted to do was regain some of her dignity back. She couldn't do that laying on a cot, nearly as the day she was born, with only a blanket keeping Naruto's eyes from seeing her body. In a hushed tone she said, "Can I have them back now?" It took a few moments for Naruto to register her request and at once he stood up and placed the chair next the cot once again. Why yes, he said with a stutter. As he walked over to a small table pushed against the cave wall, she almost giggled at his stutter. Knowing that even though this was a very embarrassing moment, he probably felt like a cat or pervert for doing what he did. The redness did not leave her face, but she was beginning to think it sweet of him for trying to take care of her. He returned moments later and set a neatly folded stack of dry clothes on the chair next to her. "Here you go," he said in a shy voice. He walked off. "I will be right down here," to give her a little privacy. Naruto walked down the natural corridor to the opening of the cave. A look of disillusion swept across his face as he watched events taking place in front of him. It was not long before Hinata made her way to the blonde while he was leaning against the cave wall looking out over the world. Lost in thought over all that had happened in what seemed like just a few minutes from then until now. Emotions ran high and raw with Naruto's words from when they were standing at the top of the falls. As she walked closer to the edge of the cave, she saw a sight that sent her grip on reality nearly over that same edge. Naruto put out his arm to catch her from spilling out of the cave and into the watery rocks below. Just then she remembered he was standing there, seeing what she saw. "We really are dead, aren't we?" she said in a low, panicked voice. Her clothes lay scattered and torn across the river beach with what could only be described as parts of her body. Blood still stained the sand and was a stark contrast to the clear blue river water that lapped at it to wash it all clean. Then she saw bits and pieces of Naruto's clothing in with hers and knew more than likely some of the body parts were also him. Naruto looked over to her and had a cheeky grin on his face. "Yes, we are," is all it took to bring Hinata's attention back to him. Looking back at his past friends recovering the pieces that had once been their bodies, he said almost jokingly, "Not the way I ever pictured I would die. I always thought it would have been in a great battle where all that the enemy could do was overpower me through sheer numbers, and still I would have nearly killed them all." He looked back at her and her face did something he had never seen in his life. Normally her face would blush and you would see the blood rush to her head. Now it looked as if all of that was turned off and her pale skin was drained of every last drop of life. It was only then that he erupted in laughter and her face lit up with shock. It took a moment before he regained control of himself, and by that time when he looked at Hinata he could see a hint of anger in her eyes, as if she thought he was making fun of her. With the realization that she was upset, he went to explain, "Those dead bits down there will be known as Naruto Uzumaki and Hinata Hyuga. Although we are standing here right now, I set it all up last night as you were sleeping. This cave is an interrogation hideout that Jiraiya used for the Konoha spy network. During my 2.5 years away training, we came here a few times while he was working. This cave has a seal on it that doesn't allow prying eyes to see or hear inside. That is why our friends below cannot smell, sense, or even sees us. Even Kakashi's Sharingan cannot see through this seal. Last night I took our last sets of clothes and came here. At the other end of this cave is a tunnel system that leads to a graveyard. That is where the two volunteers came in." Naruto pointed down at the pile of broken body bits the teams were collecting. "From this point on we will be known as dead, and we must accept this and change our identities accordingly." Hinata remained quiet as Naruto explained things to her, just letting it seep in, as she watched her once loved friends down below. Most everyone walked around with heavy shoulders as they tried to find parts of the bodies that were big enough to burn so there would be little trace of who had perished here. Clothing was gathered and even removed from the body parts to be taken back for burial and as evidence to friends and family that their loved ones had perished. Off on the grass, more near a tree line, is what appeared to be a pink and blonde mound. Right away Hinata knew that it was Sakura being held and comforted by Ino. Sakura looked like she had been crying for hours. Then the strangest thing drew her attention at the scene below. It was Shikamaru standing at the water's edge and looking up at the waterfall. With what would have normally appeared as someone swatting a bug that flew by their head, he was actually waving casually at them. A gasp escaped Hinata as she asked, "Does he really know?" Naruto looked back down at Shikamaru and smiled, "Yeah, I figured he would. While we were on top of the waterfall he had more than a chance to stop us. He could have taken control of our shadows and we would already be on our way back to Konoha. He didn't though, so it seems to me he knew we would survive and was allowing us to do so. He has always been a great friend of mine and for his caring here I will always be indebted to him. Naruto took Hinata's hand into his own and started to lead her away. He hated to do it, but their past lives were better off behind them. Come on, there is a lot we have to do and it is a long walk to get out of here. Hinata let him lead her back to where she had first woken up so they could retrieve their remaining things. She looked back quickly as the light from the corridor faded from view, knowing that their past was behind them and they were now free to start a new life. He led her through the winding caverns for what seemed like hours. He talked about how he had set everything up the night before, and about what Jiraiya had done here in the past while Naruto learned some of the gory parts of the shinobi world. Eventually, and to Hinata, thankfully they arrived at a rock door that led them out into a sparsely kept graveyard. Due to the dim light they had used to travel through the cave system, it took a few minutes for their eyes to adjust to the late afternoon sun. Looking around and not knowing where they were, Hinata begged the question, "Where are we going to go?" With no description, Naruto looked at the pale-eyed lavender princess and smiled with his response, "Home." A week and a half had passed by with nearly no incident at all, aside from a few wild animals. Naruto had insisted on staying off the roads and trails for a while longer to let news spread about their untimely deaths. During some nights they would listen to camped caravans from the shadows for news. They had heard that the official details of their deaths were due to an S-rank mission that they were assigned to together. Much to Hinata's embarrassed delight, the unofficial rumored story involved acts of heroism where Naruto would save her at the expense of his own life, and she had died lying next to him of a broken heart. She would giggle about it from time to time and Naruto would blush back at her. They were nearing a trade village and felt that it would be okay for them to walk out in public once again. The day before they would enter the village, they laid out their plans and attempted to make themselves presentable. Since Naruto had used their spare clothing for the now dead Naruto and Hinata, they only had the clothes they wore on their back. This had annoyed Hinata to travel as such, but she did try to clean and dry them any time that they stopped for the evening. Naruto did the same as well but had been used to it during his travels while training with the great sage. Hinata went to a small pond to bathe and wash her clothing before they decided to settle down for the night. Naruto created several dozen shadow clones to keep an eye around the pond while she did so, and promised none of them would be so perverted as to peep on her. While she did that, Naruto set out on his next task, that was to make it look as convincing as possible that they were not the recently famous dead shinobi. He had made a list in his head of what they would need to blend in and he began checking them off. Money had already been checked off. They had both a great deal of it, which for Hinata was not surprising since she was the Hyuga clan heiress. Naruto on the other hand had an even larger sum and he attributed it to all the missions he had gone on with Jiraiya and then the continuous fighting he had done since he returned. He just didn't have time to spend any lately. Next would have been supplies, but for all the time they were on the run and in hiding, those had amounted to nothing, something they would have to rectify once they were in the village. They also would need new names as Naruto's was not common in the first place and that would make their identities easily discovered. Naruto had chosen to use his father's name of Minato, while Hinata wanted her name to mean something in their new life together, so hers would become Suki, for the very reason she left her old home in the first place. They had even practiced for an hour calling each other their new names so there would be little chance of a slip-up. They had altered their clothes by removing identifying patches. Naruto discarded his jumpsuit top and chose to wear just his black t-shirt and removed his leg wrappings for good measure. Hinata had made more drastic changes to her outfit in the way she had removed the sleeves and hood from her jacket, effectively creating a vest. She also had stored away her mesh armor as it was always a dead giveaway of being a kunoichi. The last thing on the list would be a history. Jiraiya had taught him well on this as part of the art of infiltration during his training. To integrate into a crowd or an established group, you have to have a plausible and believable reason for being there. With a little thought he went to work nervously. Noticing a large rock in the clearing he began to cut at it with small wind chakra blades. He worked meticulously for hours until Hinata had returned. Hinata returned to camp to see Naruto fiddling with something small in his hands. By the look on his face he was concentrating very hard on what he was doing. Naruto knew that she was there as his clones had dispersed and passed on the information to him. With a happy and satisfied look he finally gazed at Hinata. Hi Hinata-chan, can you come here please? She started to walk over and noticed his stutter, something she was all too familiar with herself. Then she noticed that his coloring had become pale and he looked like a ball of nerves wound up tight. From a sitting position Naruto took Hinata's hand and steadied himself thinking. This was only to blend in, like a mission, nothing else. Then why am I so nervous to do this? Before he lost his nerve he quickly fidgeted with Hinata's hand and reluctantly let it go. Upon raising her hand up to see what he had done to it she fell to her knees in disbelief. On her left ring finger laid a dazzling ring. It was not made of metal but of a dark purple crystal instead. It was intricately cut with a precision she was sure only a master jeweler could attain. She could feel the smoothness on the inside as there was no discomfort from it and it fit her finger perfectly. On the outside there was markings and engravings she couldn't quite grasp in the darkening sky. In the top of the ring there was a deep impression cut into it. It was the shape of a whirlpool, an uzumaki. She then glanced at him and the nervousness in his eyes, something shone in her own eyes. Looking for where the light came from she looked down at his hand and saw an almost identical ring, a little wider though, in the same place that hers was. Tears flowed from her eyes at an unimaginable rate. He had made her cry, something he never wanted to do. He never wanted to see her cry. He stood up and began to walk away, feeling sorry for what he had done. I'm sorry Hinata-chan. It was stupid, I know. I thought we could use it as a cover story in the village. A young married couple traveling isn't that out of the ordinary. We'll think of Somethi. She quickly processed what she heard him say and that they were going to use marriage as a cover for why they were passing through. It was not exactly what she was hoping for, but she was happy at the thought nonetheless. As he walked away she heard him say something about changing the idea and she leapt to her feet and ran to him before he could finish his sentence. She embraced him from behind wrapping her arms around him. Tears still rolling down her cheeks. I think it is a great cover story. I am sorry I worried you with my tears. I have never been given something as beautiful as this in my entire life. Thank you Naruto-kun. He wasn't purposing to her, but she could live with the idea of being his wife even if it was only pretend. The idea of him actually meaning it sometime in the future lifted her spirits even more. Happy that she appreciated what he had given her he suggested they get ready to retire for the night as they would have a busy day tomorrow getting supplies, and resting for the long trip ahead. Both were fast asleep as the night got late and started to become early morning. In the bushes not far off while at a slow pace, 4 figures started to enter the camp. They took note of the young woman that was lying on a sleeping mat and thought of the money they would receive for selling her in the trade market, after they had their way with her first. A few feet from her was a young man with bright blonde hair also asleep. They considered him expendable and moved in to make it so. One man raised a large sword above his head and brought it down point first into the blonde's chest right where the heart would be. Just then a loud pop had awakened Hinata from her slumber. Even a little blurry-eyed she could see 3 men standing over the mat that Naruto had been sleeping on. There was a sword impaled into the ground. As fast as she could she got to her feet and took a stance to defend herself against their attackers. As they rushed she sent her chakra to her hands while activating her Byakugan. The one that reached her first would be the first to drop for the night. With amazing reflexes she struck him in the right shoulder and left leg simultaneously. Her next 2 strikes caught the same man in the left shoulder as she ducked his swing at her with a follow-up strike to the neck. The strike to the neck sealed the deal as it disrupted his chakra flow to his head and severed the veins in the spine at the same time. If he was a trained ninja he may have survived. As the second and third man approached she swept the closest to the ground, and upon coming up she brought her arms back and pumped enough chakra into her hands that they started to glow. Just as she was about to leap forward and strike the only one left standing at the moment, a set of arms appeared out of nowhere holding her arms behind her back. One arm had restrained her too while a hand had pulled her hair forcing her head back. This caused an immense amount of pain, disrupting her concentration on the chakra she was using in her hands. She let out a scream. Naruto was already on his way, when he noticed his clone pop, and entered the clearing where they had made camp. Not stopping at all, he heard Hinata scream and saw the one large man was behind her. He was keeping her arms behind her back by hooking them with one of his large ones. Two more men were approaching her and one had a very large sword. Naruto reached in his kunai pouch and in one seamless motion let two fly. The kunai flew through the air at blinding speeds, soundless until they hit their mark. One had hit the base of the sword with a loud clank, forcing it out of the man's hands. The other had a more deadly target, and that was seen when it sunk itself in the head of the other assailant. He was dead before he even knew it. The attacker that had lost his sword turned just in time to see Naruto launch himself at him. Naruto's arm was stretched forward and all that could be heard was his shout, Rasengan. The attack landed on the man's chest, throwing him into a nearby boulder with a sound that Naruto was sure nobody would survive. Seeing what had happened to his associates, the man that now held Hinata had opted to release her hair in place of a knife at her throat. This infuriated Naruto to no end. I'll give you one chance to let her go now before you end up like your friends over there, Naruto said to the coward that was hiding behind Hinata. You go your way, we go ours, we forget about all of this. The man looked a little panicked, but they were no friends of his. Just merely work associates. Ha, you think that just because you know a few tricks, it don't mean I'm not going to be leaving without something for my troubles. She will fetch a good price with such soft smooth skin. Hell, I'll just have to sample the goods myself. That sent Naruto over the edge. He pointed his finger at the man behind Hinata. Let go of my wife. Why did I say that? Was it because of their cover story? Why have these thoughts been coming into my head? These thoughts lingered in the back of his mind for the moment, in large part due to his focus on rescuing Hinata from the man in front of him. It was then that it clicked in her head. She knew right then what was happening in Naruto's head. His emotions were coming through in raw form. He was holding himself back from reaching out to her, even though he knew how she felt for him. For what reason she didn't know, but she was going to help him. She was going to be the one to save him. Her face softened into a smile as she knew that she would be alright, he would protect her. With her Byakugan still active, she could see an enormous amount of chakra focus in Naruto's pointing hand. She was amazed to see such a sight. She recognized it because it was similar to one of her own techniques. Then it released. It was almost thin enough to not be seen by the eye, but she saw it as clear as day, and the speed was astounding. Naruto, with his pointed finger at the man, released a small amount of wind-infused chakra from his fingertip. Before the man could react, it passed within inches of Hinata's neck and struck the bottom of the knife blade, cleanly cutting it in half. It did not stop there and continued on to tear into the man's shoulder, nearly cutting it off. He dropped to the ground and was in shock instantaneously. With Hinata free, she ran to him and embraced him in a hug. No tears this time, but a smile upon her face as she knew what she had to do to save his emotions. He hugged her in return and spoke, "Let's get our bags. It is almost morning and we can make it to town for breakfast." When they separated, she looked into his eyes to see sincere relief and happiness that she was okay. They made it out to the road, leaving the bodies where they were. Their bags were on their backs and they were heading into a civilized village for the first time in almost a month. The young couple entered the village as the shops were opening. There was a sweet smell of pastries in the air as stands and restaurants prepared for breakfast. A small growl came from Hinata's stomach and they both looked down at it. A slight blush filled her cheeks while Naruto let out a small chuckle. "Well, I think I know where our first stop is." Hinata looked over at him with a small smile and nodded at the embarrassing announcement her body was giving them. It wasn't far before they found a small breakfast restaurant and sat down to eat. Although Naruto could have really gone for a few dozen bowls of ramen, he couldn't pass this up when he saw Hinata's face nearly explode at the sight of pastries. The waiter brought them a large plate of cinnamon rolls and they began to disappear at an amazing pace, much to Naruto's surprise, by Hinata. They looked across what they could see of the village. It wasn't all that small and should be able to provide the supplies they needed. They went over their priorities and decided they definitely needed some new clothes first. After eating, they set out to look for shops that would provide them what they needed. Naruto was looking through some orange and blue jackets with a little bit of nostalgia when Hinata came up to his side to grab him by the arm and hold him close to her. She saw what he was looking at and with a small smile pulled him away. "Come on, Minato-kun, I know what you will look good in." With that, she pulled him away. They spent the next few hours looking for clothes and traveling supplies. Naruto had never thought Hinata could have been a shopper, but he should have expected it after being on the run for a month. It was getting late in the afternoon, and Naruto couldn't carry any more bags even if he had extra arms. While trying to figure out how they were going to travel with all this stuff, Hinata led him to the local inn, so they could put things away and finally get cleaned up. They were happy that no one questioned them and their story was readily accepted at the inn when they asked for a single room. After the woman behind the desk had seen their rings, she congratulated them and told them how wonderful it was to be a newlywed. She even insisted on giving them a larger room at no extra cost. They made their way to their room and Hinata let Naruto in so he could finally set the bags down. When she finally entered, she was taken aback at the sight in front of her. Although not as large as the rooms in her old home of the Hyuga compound, the room was indeed large. It even had its own personal bath so they would not have to use the public ones down the hall. What really caught her eye, sending another rush of heat and redness to her cheeks, was the large bed that sat in the center of the room. She had half expected two beds, but this was definitely a room for a married couple. She looked to Naruto to see if it would have the same effect on him and hoped he would not see the uneasiness that was written on her face. He had just set the bags down and was stretching his back with the relief of the added weight being off of him. Noting, as she watched him look around the room and take it in, he seemed unfazed at the thought of sharing a private room with her. Looking over at her, he stated, "You can take the bed, I'll be fine on the floor." He started to go through the bags and pulled out a set of his new clothes. "You don't mind if I get cleaned up, do you? I could use a good scrub." With the wear and exhaustion on his face, he walked to the washroom and closed the door behind him. A new wave of heat found her face and she immediately started to find something to occupy her mind and time. Reaching into a bag, she pulled out a few cups of instant ramen, thinking that he would be getting hungry soon. After all, he had taken her to wherever she wanted to go in the market and even allowed her to choose the places to eat. She went to work in prepping the ramen so it would be ready by the time he got out of the bath. She busied herself with other things like organizing their supplies and looking through her new clothes until she heard the door open behind her. Out stepped Naruto in his new clothes, running a towel through his hair. Her breath was caught in her throat. He was wearing what she picked out for him and she liked what she saw. He was wearing a pair of dark green cargo pants, with pockets running down the side. They hung loose from his waist but you could see it hugged his backside. The black form-fitting shirt he had on showed off every definition of his chest. He was well chiseled from all his time training, with muscular arms that were normally hidden by his orange and black jacket he left behind. She could even see the definition of his abs. Then the shirt tapered off loosely until it hung just below his waistband. As he exited the bathroom toweling his hair, he could smell the food that was made just for the gods. There, sitting on the table, was a few cups of instant ramen steaming and ready to eat. "Thank you, Hinata. I am hungry and this will hit the spot." He walked over to the table and pulled up a chair. Hinata got up and went to join him. Sitting down next to him, she grabbed a cup herself and started to eat. "Naruto-kun, what are we doing?" Looking over at her after just taking a bite of noodles he swallowed, "Eating ramen," he said with a smile. "No," Hinata said, shaking her head. What are we going to do? Where will we go? Realizing during their time traveling he had never really told her his destination. He began to tell her of his heritage, of who his father and mother were. He explained the secret that the village had kept during his childhood to protect him, resulting in his mistreatment from the many villagers. As they ate ramen, they went over the plans and laid out the journey in front of them. As he saw that the last of the food was gone, he looked at her and simply said, "Home." He got up from the table and gathered the trash to be thrown away. Looking back at her, he suggested that she get cleaned up while he finished packing their bags. They were going to leave early in the morning. With a smile, she got up and grabbed some clothes, then proceeded to the washroom. As the door clicked behind her, she ran everything through her head that he told her about himself and his family's past. She almost couldn't believe it. She had actually fallen in love with the fourth Hokage's son. Not only was his father a Hokage, he was a legend. Even his mother was in her own right. She was the one that contained the nine-tailed fox before him. Slowly she pulled off her clothes, lost in thought, until the object on her finger caught her eye as it shined a soft light into her eyes. She took it off her finger and examined it closely. It truly was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. He must have put a lot of heart into creating the rings. Then she noticed on the inside of the ring was an inscription reading, "Hinata, never forget." As she stepped into the hot bath, she felt her muscles relax. Thinking of Naruto and the conflict he had inside himself over his emotions, she thought to herself, tonight was the night. She was going to help him whether he liked it or not. He had avoided any attempt to talk about her confession, or how he felt about her, but she wasn't going to let him avoid it any longer. Naruto was just finishing up putting all their supplies and clothes into their travel bags when Hinata stepped out of the bathroom. He was nearly floored at the sight. If goddesses truly existed, then the woman standing in front of him now was their queen. Her damp hair hung at her back straight down and didn't waver due to the water weight. She was wearing a pair of leather long shorts that stopped just above her knees. They fit tightly against her skin and hugged her thighs, showing of her supple hips. He could see the lavender top that was a little darker than the color of her eyes that fit just as tightly as her shorts and fell just below her thin waistline, something that was never seen while she always wore her trademark coat. Over the top she had on a black leather vest that matched her shorts and remained open in the center by her well-endowed breast. There were no sleeves on it, but it had small pockets in the front. Just the sight of her sparked a primal reaction deep within him. Naruto. His head jerked up as if he had just come out of a daydream. She continued, "We need to talk." She blushed at the topic she was determined to voice now. He gulped as he brought himself back to reality. "Okay, about what?" He stood up and was between her and the bed. She was breathing heavy, but she pushed forward. "You have been avoiding my feelings for you the entire time that we have been traveling. You know how I feel about you. I love you. Now I want to know right now why you have been doing so. How do you feel about me?" She was right. He was uncomfortable with bringing it up. He hung his head low, trying to find the words to tell her why he had been holding back. In truth, he didn't know if he loved her, but his feelings for her were more than the infatuation that he ever had for a certain pink-haired girl. He would give his life for her and care for her as long as she would let him. While still looking at the floor, he tried to explain himself. "Everywhere I go, people get hurt by those that are after me. They want what is inside me." His hand went to his stomach. "I don't want you to get hurt because of this, demon, because of me." With sternness in her voice, she was irritated by the poor excuse. "That is not your decision. If I get hurt from standing by your side, for loving you, I would be happy for that pain. The pain I would feel to have never loved you would be greater than any that someone else could inflict. But the Kyuubi, the demon, is part of me. How could you love someone that is a demon?" This was his rationale when it came to love. That because the demon fox lived in his body, it made him part demon as well. She raised her hand to his cheek and in her soft voice, "All I see is the kindest, most caring person I have ever known. You have protected everyone you could while never asking for more than just to be acknowledged. That does not sound like a demon at all to me, but the making of a great man. He looked up into her eyes and steadied himself. If he would choose to care for her as more than just one of his precious people, she would have to see who he truly was. He looked up into her pale lavender eyes, eyes he could lose himself in for the rest of eternity. May I show you? He said. She looked at him strangely as if she wasn't sure what he was talking about, but she nodded with trust just the same. His hand rose to the side of her face and he closed his eyes. It was an instant later that darkness took hold of her. She stood there in darkness and looked around. It looked like she was standing in a flooded tunnel. Water came up to her ankles. Naruto was standing next to her holding her hand and she blushed at the thought even in this strange place. He looked at her and led her down the tunnel. Soon they came to a set of cage doors. On those doors was a paper seal and the area was dimly lit. He looked at her with his head half hung. I'm sorry. Then she saw it.